Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Digital Mental Health and Addiction Interventions for Adolescents, Young Adults, and Families. This webinar is produced in partnership with the ATTC Network Coordinating Office, AMERSA, and the Adolescent Expert Project by NORC at the University of Chicago. This webinar is part of the Transitional Age Youth Webinar Series. I encourage you to sign up for these other titles at AMERSA, ATTC, or the NORC websites. Today's webinar presenter is Fred Munch. Dr. Munch is a clinical psychologist and the president of the Partnership to End Addiction. His focus is on building and testing digital interventions to prevent problem substance use and treat addiction in real-world settings for young people and their concerned others. Fred has been the principal investigator on multiple behavioral health grants from NIAAA, NIDA, FDA, RWJF Pioneer, Upswing, Twilio, and many others to improve behavioral health outcomes using technology. It is with great pleasure to introduce Dr. Munch.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here to think about how we can discuss and expand innovations in the addictions, and specifically looking forward to discussing how we can advance that for young people and their families. A little bit of background, the Partnership to End Addiction is a merger between the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids /America and the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse. We've been around for about 2 years now as a merged organization, and we focus in a few areas, primarily helping the helpers, which is we empower family members to prevent and intervene when they have a loved one struggling. We advance effective care, and our focus has been on family and doing technical assistance for family-based treatments, person-centered care, system improvement, with a special focus on integration of technology. Our research is focused on family-based interventions. Aaron Hogue, my colleague, has a grant to study recovery research within families and how we can expand the recovery experience of family members. We're working on the SAMHSA Family Center of Excellence with the National Federation of Families. So a lot of the work we're doing is how we can advance addiction care specifically with families. We also work on public policy. How can we ensure that parity, that family members are covered through parity on addiction service? And how do we change culture? And many of you know us from our ads through the partnership. And now our focus is how do we engage those who are worried about a loved one? How do we make sure people know they can be empowered to change? I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues who have helped me with the material presented in this slideshow and presentation, as well as other individuals I've worked with throughout the year, and of course the funders who have helped us do all of this important work. That's both governmental funders, including federal and state, as well as private foundations. One of the things I'd like to do in a presentation is have people think about questions as we're going through. So it's not just going to be focused on the research. One is there's not a ton of research out there, in real world settings. So as we move forward, thinking about how we can actually implement some of the technology in real world settings. So I'd like to start with what are the ingredients of successful digital interventions with a focus on young people and families, the landscape and the research of what's out there, including the research, and then what are some existing low-hanging fruit opportunities for practitioners and researchers. So I always like to start out with something very obvious, which is technology is just a tool. I always laugh when someone does a Wikipedia entry, but it really says a lot, which is the simplest form of technology is just to use and basic tools, and that goes back from the beginning of time. And if we look at communication, communication technology is just a tool from the printing press to the internet. And one of the things that is important to remember as we move forward and we think about the evolution of technology and where we're going to go is tools also create new tools. So as we think and move forward, I'm referring to AI here, but it's about any tool. And the key to a tool is using it the right way. We often follow shiny objects, and since teens love tech, we say, okay, tech is the answer. But being aware of using the tool the right way, being aware of using a tool and its potential power, but also its limitations. If we really think about the explosion of screening and feedback apps with the computer and tracking apps, we've sort of largely seen they haven't really lived up to the promise. So the technology's there, but it's still about the human experience. So understanding the human experience and how that interacts with technology is something that I'll be discussing throughout. And as you think about using technology tools, making sure you're using it the right way. And approaching this, I've learned from the user experience community, is when you approach the use of technology, is start with the barriers. And if we don't start here, very often we'll follow that shiny object. So what problem are you trying to solve? Is it personalization? Do you need an assessment? Do you not need an assessment? Then based on that problem you're trying to solve, what is it you actually want to achieve? Is it that you want to achieve that someone feels more connected? Well, the best way to do that is to go to somebody's house and have someone sit with them. There's not necessarily technology, but we don't have the means to necessarily do that. So then the next is, how can technology help do that? What are the things that we can think about when we're working with young people? What are the technologies? And specifically, what are the mediums by which young people use technology? There's lots of ways to send someone a message, to intervene in real time, but young people don't use email. They don't use other forms of communication. They don't pick up the phone, but they will use SMS. They'll use WhatsApp. They'll use Instagram. So thinking of the medium is an important component of the technology that's not just the intervention itself. When we think about technology, mediums, and modes, we think about how we can enhance opportunities to connect, and specifically how we can do it based on how people live. It used to be that treatment was episodic. You'd go to a therapist. You might go to that therapist every week. You might go a couple times a week. If you go to an inpatient setting, you're there for a continuous period of time, and that was the continuous work. There was phone follow-up. That was continuous. Now we've shifted from episodic and continuous to real-time continuous. Typically, what you can do is continuous now ranges from a text message every day to ongoing monitoring of someone 24/7. There's also the opportunity for synchronous and asynchronous communication. So the conversation right now, what we're doing is asynchronous in some ways. I'm presenting to you, you are going to listen to it, and then we'll have a synchronous conversation. It's both automated and human now. So now we can reply. So someone can type in a text message and they can type in relapse and get feedback automatically from a bot, but they can also talk to a human. What's most fascinating to me is this passive and active, and we're going to go into this a little bit, is that it used to be that there was an active back and forth. There was very little passive intervention happening or passive assessment happening. You had to fill out a survey for us to get data to help build a personalized intervention. Now we can get lots of passive data from text, from voice, from video, from sensors, and we can actively intervene, or we can passively intervene, and that's a whole nother opportunity we have. And then we also have captured and ephemeral. So very often a one-on-one conversation in a therapist's office, that was ephemeral. Now we can capture data, look at data, analyze data, or we can keep it anonymous. So having those opportunities. And most important, underlying all of this is that we can do it in a more effortless, but also salient way for the individual. So when we think about it, an individual can do this from their home. that's much more effortless. So that's why we're seeing this rise in individuals engaging in care. And this is particularly true for teens who are not always interested in being in care. As we think about technology, it's also important to think about the features of technology and all of the types of different types of components of a mobile phone, of a computer. So there's voice and text, and that's where we can do SMS, you can do IVR, you can understand emotional tone, you can do natural language processing. There's so much we can do just with voice and text in terms of the way we intervene. It's powerful, it's easy, it's simple. I always like to focus on the lowest hanging fruit opportunities, and voice and text are there. There's also camera and video. So telepsych, we can see each other. So that video allows me to see your emotional expression, my emotional expression. There's emerging literature on biomonitoring using video. You can know my heart rate based on a video now. You can know my heart rate variability. You can know when my heart rate rises, when it falls. That gets into privacy concerns and it's a little scary, but there's also opportunity. Gyroscope, activity monitoring, geolocation, ambient sound, proximity sensors. All of these things have great opportunity, but they're also want to remember that they haven't panned out necessarily the way we thought they would. We always thought that geolocation, we could identify triggers, and if someone goes into a certain area, it really hasn't panned out the way we thought. But where it is sort of working is, hey, here's a meeting. I want to look for a self-help mutual support meeting in my area. So I'm going to click a button and all the meetings are going to pop up. So looking at the opportunities, looks at what works, what doesn't work, but understanding that sensors have a lot of power, and understanding the medium is a great place to start. So in addition, as we think about the mediums, understanding the evolution of the technology and looking at how it evolved, that it's each one of the technologies build off one another. So it started out with TV, right? That was reach, dissemination, scale. I actually started having letters and then TV. But we have reach, dissemination, scale. There's also phone. Then the CD-ROM changed certain things where there was a little more activity. You could personalize, you could tailor, you could start to adapt it within the intervention, but it was sort of a one and done. And then the web came along where you could start to actually capture data and analytics. You could start to create social groups. Social groups were one of the first things that were created on the web, and early literature on creating social connection for mental health and addiction happened in the 90s. Stigma reduction, and that's something I'll go into. There was really an opportunity to reach out anonymously and engage without anybody knowing who you were. So there was that opportunity, which increases disclosure. And the mobile phone, the greatest opportunity in the mobile phone to start was that it was there. It was right in front of you. You could do just-in-time interventions. There was salience. You carry your mobile phone with you all the time. So this evolved one on top of each other. And then finally we have sensors, and there's precision with sensors. We have smartwatches now that can collect data. It's objective data for the most part. And these smartwatches are an extension of the smartphone. So now it's on your body. So you're not just carrying it, but it's on your body. And then there's also implants, which are a whole nother opportunity, which I will not go into. So what is tech good and less good at doing that? And I'm going to go into the good in a little more detail. So the concerns are important. I'm not going to go into great detail in subsequent slides on the concerns. I'll talk about it a little bit, but there's a number of concerns that we always should be mindful of. Top of mind is privacy. and who's collecting the data, how we're using the data, and particularly with young people who seem unfettered in what they will put online, just being mindful and ensuring proper consent. There can be dehumanization in terms of young people being particularly, but anyone, it's easier to say something online. We're not thinking of the reaction of the other person. We often are much more compassionate when someone's in front of us because we can see their reaction. When you can't see someone's reaction, it starts to dehumanize. So being mindful of these limitations of the technology and some concerns moving forward. I encourage people to think about the concerns just as much as you think about the pros and cons as you dive in working with technology solutions for prevention and intervention in addiction care. So going through, I'm going to highlight some of the good things. And the reason I'm doing that is because when we think about the concerns, they're pretty universal, the concerns, and often we include them in how we build technology, but it doesn't necessarily talk about the innovation and the opportunity of the technology. It's a watch out. That doesn't mean we should do it. We just have to keep them in mind as we're building it. But particularly with young people, no surprise to anyone, youth use technology and they like it. And most important, they prefer digital health connections for stigmatizing topics. And, as we think about how we engage young people, engaging youth using technology is the way to engage. But it's not just youth, it's adults too. And what we see is that there's no digital divide with the mobile phone in particular by race or ethnicity or SES in youth. Now, the biggest digital divide is in terms of with the mobile phone in particular, but also other types of devices, is with older adults and lack of applications in different languages. So we all know that technology can improve the reach and connection of professionals to individuals in need, of peers to individuals in need, and to automated services to individuals in need. When I think about reach, I think about salience. How can we make change goals salient? How can we help someone make that person they want to be more salient, both from cognitive to social? How can we bring someone who's going to help someone in somebody's room? So thinking about reach and connection, and with young people, this is so important. Disclosure, I mentioned this before. Youth and adults disclose way more to digital platforms than in person. There's 50 years of research on this. And what we see, it's moderated by the condition. So someone higher in anxiety is much more likely to want to communicate via a computer or a digital medium, and the type of disclosure, more stigmatizing. And young people in particular, they prefer to talk about sensitive topics over text, but in person, they like to talk about less stigmatizing. And I see this with my adolescent children. They sit on top of one another, texting each other. It's easy for them to text. And some of the research done on this is that there's no expectation of a reaction. So you can disclose something and then that someone's either not going to respond or the response will be mediated by some distance. So creating that distance actually increases disclosure. Great opportunity. There's also so much data, this passive and active data, and collecting this in the real world. And we're really just getting started on this. There's amazing work being done on natural language processing as a predictor of relapse, as a predictor of who might be struggling with a problem. Some early research showed that just pictures of alcohol in social media feeds was linearly correlated with actual drinking severity. So looking at these type of passive data feeds is an opportunity that we're seeing. We're seeing it in mental health, we're seeing it in addiction. And the key here is, how do we figure out a way to combine data? We just did a study funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Pioneer Portfolio, where we looked at active and passive data and trying to understand impulsivity in the real world with how people use their mobile phone in addition to some active tasks. And what we found was how often someone touches their screen and turns it on and off is a predictor of sensation seeking. The mean number of calls is positively associated with a number of impulsivity constructs. And really what this does is highlight the power of passive sensing to build models. Now we have to be very mindful of the concerns here. And just like Facebook and Google and Twitter are mining our data all the time, so being mindful of how they're mining that data to manipulate us, we can use this for good as well. We can understand what data is out there, and we can help build just-in-time interventions. This ultimately leads to personalization. And personalization is the true global promise of what technology can do. I just want to highlight that this encompasses everything. This is not specific to anything. Digital health allows for hyper-personalization. And with personalization, what we're able to do is we can think about just-in-time models. I love this slide because one side is self-regulation theory and the other is a just-in-time intervention. And thinking about just-in-time, we can now intervene in the moment for self-regulation, because what we're able to do is the power of personalization beyond content is timing. So now we can personalize for time and state. And for young people, this is crucial because they're in the moment. Their moods are changing all the time. So how do we personalize to state, and how do we personalize to time is some of the greatest promise of digital interventions. And there's a great article written a while back on why people look at push alerts. And the number one reason is because they were free at that moment. So to understand, it wasn't about the content. It's just, yeah, I was free at that moment. So how we interact and how young people interact with the technology has to be a focus of the interventions we build. One example of this is a study we did a few years back where we looked at sending text messages at 6 p.m. every day to help people reduce their drinking. And we tested a number of different types of messaging, consequence framed, gain framed, tailored. What we found was if you started drinking before you got that message at 6 p.m., you had significantly worse outcomes. And that's when controlling for baseline drinking. So we controlled for severity. So when someone gets that intervention is very important in thinking about the opportunity to build these just-in-time interventions. We can personalize it to the exact time someone is used to drinking. And what we've also found is that drinking patterns are very consistent. That usually will people drink on certain days, they'll start on certain times, so we can build these just-in-time interventions, both for youth and for adults. In terms of the other opportunity, it's that ongoing connection. We can engage people and keep them connected over time. And continuous engagement is key, but it's key for someone when someone wants it. With young people, they're often in and out. They're not always motivated to chat with a therapist or a peer about some goal, and this is particularly true of young people who do not see the consequences. So how can we keep them engaged at their own pace when we think about it? Every little touch point is a separate intervention, and that is the promise of technology. It used to be, here is this CBT intervention, it's 12 sessions, we're going to do this, this, and this. Now we can really think of every little touch point as an intervention for that ongoing connection. So I know I've chatted a lot about sort of technology globally, but the reason for that is because when we think about technology, if we come in with this mindset, very often what we're able to do is think about how we can apply it to specific populations, including young people. And when we look at sort of adolescent developmental needs, this is a great way to think about how we can use technology to intervene with young people, adolescents and young adults, and they have different needs. All of you are experts in the field. You know about predictors of adolescent substance use. You know about expectancies and motivations for use and how much that drives the interventions you do in person or remotely with young people. And so matching these predictors, matching the expectancies and motivations to the interventions, the same has to occur with technology-based interventions. And as we think about this, technology can align with developmental reinforcers. It can align with the expectancies. It can align with some of the predictors of problem use and the opportunities to intervene. There's a great article. It's actually not an article. There's a great supplement in the Journal of Adolescent Health on technology and improving adolescent health. So it's more global. It's not specific to addiction, but I really highlight this special section. And one of the articles in particular talks about how do we make technology align with developmental reinforcers. And one of the wonderful things about technology is it's inherently social. There's inherently a entertainment value. It's built for information seeking. The web is built for information seeking. Kids can pass time, they can entertain themselves, they can get reinforcement, they can get emotional learning, and they can build some mastery and efficacy, whether that's in a game or another medium. So technology itself can be mirrored to those developmental reinforcers, expectancies, and potential predictors of problem use. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to be throwing up a few slides with references based on the slides I just discussed. For example, there's the Journal of Adolescent Health special section, the introduction, and there's other articles specifically related to adolescent technology use, adolescent technology, and adolescent technology-based interventions. So the broad statements. So what do we know about digital health and young people, particularly for prevention and intervention in the addictions? One is that the largest literature is by far for nicotine and alcohol. There's a dearth of information with other substances. The largest literature is for college-aged adolescents and young adults. There's a heavy emphasis on early intervention in the computer and web-based literature. And then you're seeing SMS, online social support, and mobile apps trend a little bit more severe. They can go anywhere, but this is what the literature we're seeing in the literature. After brief digital feedback and digital feedback literature on computers, text messaging, general social support, using social media or other online groups are the most studied mediums of intervention and mobile intervention. We certainly need more research on more severe adolescent and young adult SUD populations and for different substances. And we need more research on caregiver and family-based digital interventions. In addition to the research findings on quantitative research and outcomes research, understanding the qualitative research findings with adolescents and young adults really provides an opportunity for us to build new interventions using technology. Whether it's that young people don't feel the consequences until it interacts with the developmental milestone, or that something has to be believable and credible to them in their own world for an intervention to work. So how do we work from maybe a dissonance model that we've been pushing for many years to more of a consonance model? How do we focus on reflecting the values and views about adolescents' health to them rather than forcing a view on them? And also, we know not only from the quantitative research, but from the qualitative research, connection and support are two of the most important things that young people and young adults want in their interventions. So the outcome literature is both broad and varied and also quite narrow. And I'm starting with serious games because it's the opportunity for intervention with the lowest severity. It's an opportunity to be stealth with active and passive mediums in terms of how we can promote substance use prevention and intervention. And it's defined as, there is a game with a primary purpose beyond entertainment to communicate and improve health. And that can both be done stealth and very overtly. And in terms of the reviews, they typically have small positive effects on health-related behaviors, both in SUD and outside SUD, but the effect is largely fleeting. And so more research appears to be being done on how to keep people engaged in serious games in their own homes. One of the stealth skills building games that I really like are the opportunity to think about refusal skills in a way that's not overtly talking about refusal skills. So these are stealth passive skill building. You see this, they've done a good job on this in the nicotine and tobacco literature. There was a DXM campaign where it was just a video game to show essentially the effects and consequences of using DXM. All of these interventions have shown fairly good effects in young people in changing attitudes and beliefs around certain substances. There's a great opportunity here. The problem is dissemination of these type of things, making parents, caregivers, and others aware, and they typically work for younger people rather than older adolescents and young adults. The largest literature is on digital normative feedback and brief personalized feedback, primarily in college students, and it's meant to increase problem awareness, create some discrepancy. The problem is that when we look at the social norms feedback in general, it reveals very little effect. And overall, you're seeing that personalized feedback may be a little bit better than normative feedback, but it really has to be tailored to experience both social norms sort of generally, but also in someone's environment. And the personalized feedback shouldn't just be consequence based. There's some evidence that targeted, so like 21st birthday might be a little better. There's also some evidence that in lab appears to be better than remote. So if someone's remote, they might not have the same effect than if they're in a lab where there's an expectancy that they're doing this for a specific reason. And part of the problem here is it's trying to create problem awareness in people who may not believe there's a problem. So it's not necessarily the technology alone, but it's the target that might be some of the problem. So as we move forward, people are really trying to work on this in new ways. After personalized feedback and normative feedback, social connections are prevalent in the literature, and it's primarily done through on social media sites, and it's more towards the more severe end of the continuum. It's also been done with SMS and in-app social connection and social groups. It's really where peers can interact and often it's moderated by a professional. Overall, the efficacy is quite good when you look at the outcome literature, primarily when you're looking at recovery support and helplines where there's some sort of social interaction. The most important outcome here is that these are usually real world trials as well, so it's not tightly controlled, so you're seeing it in the real world. And also note that anyone can do it. This is easy to build. You can build your own Facebook intervention where you're engaging people and you can do it in a day. So you don't have to get an app, you don't have to do anything, you can do it in there. Now there's privacy concerns that you always have to be mindful of when you're using external apps, but embedding social interaction and peer support is one of the primary mechanisms and ways to intervene with youth and young adults. There's also a number of skills training web programs, mobile apps where there are structured CBT skills training, where it includes refusal skills, where it includes role play, contingency management. Most of this has been done in the SUD world with individuals over 21, but there's certainly enough literature on individuals under 21. The problem with the literature is it's usually embedded in tightly controlled studies. And so when we see this, we question the real world application of these outside of these studies or outside of a formal treatment center. When we think about the problem of engagement, one of the best ways to increase engagement is to think about how we can proactively intervene without asking someone to proactively do it on their own. And the text messaging literature, particularly around young people, is revealing that people will stay engaged in text messaging interventions, partially because they don't have to do much. And it's very easy. It's part of their preferred mode of communication. So what are we seeing? There's great outcomes for binge drinking, and I'll give an example of a study after this. There's mixed outcomes for other substances, and particularly in terms of long-term outcomes, but overall it's positive. There's a focus on commitment and goals. So you're able to reinforce commitment and goals through messaging proactively. There's very high engagement, and people stay involved in these messaging studies and real world interventions for long periods of time. Why? Because they don't have to do anything. We did a study and it was with individuals over 18, but what we found, both 18 to 25 and above 25, was that people wanted to continue to get the messages. And we asked them why. We said, you just went through a 3-month study and 80% of people wanted to continue getting the messages. And what did we find out? They're like, we don't have to do anything. It's nice to get this reminder. So these brief digital breadcrumbs to make change goals more salient is a great opportunity to intervene, particularly with young people who might not be motivated. And as I mentioned, the just-in-time features. If you want to dive into this literature more, I highly recommend reading Brian Suffoletto's work. He's done by far the most research in this area, really trying to understand the mechanisms as well. One study he did just briefly, young adults 18 to 25 in the ER. He's done many studies with this population. What he found is significant reduction in overall drinking. And so this is one of the most targeted interventions that you might find with this population to reduce drinking, with the largest effect sizes that you might see. And it was done in a real world setting, just highlighting how powerful that is. There's also, if we take text messaging to the next level where it's either automated or not automated, the next level of that is conversational agents and chatbots and using artificial intelligence. And one of the nice things is that there's always available support for this. And so what you might call a dumb bot is you text, drink to a system, and then you get some drinking tips, to stay safe. But there's also more advanced and robust conversational agents out there. And studies really do show that there's feasibility and overall positive health benefits, particularly for mental health in adolescents. There's not a great SUD literature, but I do want to highlight it. And there's some on the smoking, in the smoking landscape, and there's good feasibility, but overall the literature base is quite small. But what we do know is that adolescents like conversational agents, and it can be a great initial strategy for engagement, then to connect someone to a human. You all know, because of COVID, about the opportunity for video chat and remote-based traditional therapy. So the literature's there. It works with young people, it works with old people. Don't need to reinforce that because you're all probably doing it anyway. So beyond what we have in terms of the literature, beyond what we're seeing in the research, I always like to dive into what are the commercial applications out there and what's happening. Now, I couldn't get a slide, I couldn't find something specifically only with adolescent-based SUD prevention and intervention applications. But if we look at the digital mental health landscape, all of these companies are popping up, and they're coming up with multi-solution applications and programs for people to change their behavior. And they involve a few key components. One is that there's always an interactive, automated, personalized component where someone comes in, fills out an assessment, and gets some feedback. There is always a human component where individuals come in and they have some automated component and a human component. David Moore, who's an amazing researcher, coined this supportive accountability. You can't change someone's behavior in just an automated way or just a human way. You have to leverage the strengths of automation and human interaction. And we're seeing this specifically in the SUD space as well. These are just the number of startups in the SUD space alone. heavily focused on interventions for those who already have a problem, but there's a growing list of startups in the early intervention phase. Very similar to the research, you're seeing it mostly in alcohol and opioids. There is some for nicotine, but those are mostly apps, so it's actually a little different. But we're really seeing this growth in direct consumer technology applications to improve addiction outcomes. There's also many self-guided apps. So drink tracking apps, tools to help individuals meet their goals. This is a nice way to engage in the process. Some of these have some human connection now more than they had in the past. But it's a way for an individual to start the process of change without needing to interact with someone. And these self-guided apps provide a real benefit to young people who are starting to think about that maybe their alcohol or drug use is a problem, and they can engage in these apps, knowing that there's not going to be any feedback or an interaction with an individual because they're not ready at this point. So we're also seeing a big shift in the number of treatment organizations engaging in digital mental health as part of a larger offering for a program. We're seeing it Hazleton, Karen, Wellbridge, there's many others. This is specifically a Hazleton program where once someone leaves treatment, they have all of these options to stay connected. They have automated mobile app, they have connections to health portals. Whatever it might be, they're offering a multi-component solution. This is probably one of the fastest growing trends in traditional SUD treatment, where there's an ongoing, continuing relationship with the individual when they leave to keep them connected to care. There's also nonprofits, mutual support groups. They're all embracing and leveraging technology. We see this both from support for mental health, but also addiction. And then we're also seeing it particularly in terms of the online recovery and mutual support place. There has been such a dramatic increase since COVID in the number of online meetings that it's allowing people who never would have reached out to reach out and join meetings. So what about family and caregiver treatments? There are concerned significant others and adolescents and young adults, and we can think about them as separate and we can think about them as integrated. And again, going back to the barriers to family engagement, when we look at the review of the barriers, we see this opportunity for digital, and we're really in the early phases here. But if you look at some of the core reasons that families are not engaged in care is coordinating schedules. Well, now you can do it over Zoom, so you don't have to travel anywhere, and you can coordinate schedules from someone's own home. Unengaged family members, there's no excuse not to go into treatment now. You can't make that excuse. All you need is a phone. Organizational expertise. Now we can go outside and think that you don't have to have that person in your organization. You can get consultants to help integrate family-based treatments. And then overall, there's been this ignoring of the relevance of the concerned other, and now we can start to think about other ways to engage and not ignore family members as part of the intervention. Overall, there's a very limited empirical literature. However, there's a number of parent training programs for childhood disruptive disorders, which give us an idea that parents are interested in being engaged, particularly in terms of self-paced courses. There's a telehealth and video chat literature that's more prevalent in the mental health literature, but it shows that it can be done. Provider and peer phone-based interventions are effective. We've seen that over the years. There's an emerging literature on text messaging to increase parental self-efficacy and care in the mental health literature. Really see this as a large window of opportunity. So here are some references. I encourage you all to look at this. A lot of this is outside of the SUD space, but a lot of it is applicable. There are consumer programs out there, just like there's consumer programs for direct consumer, there's consumer programs for parents and caregivers, both in terms of prevention, intervention, mutual support, and online skills building that's self-guided. As I mentioned, nonprofits are in the space. We're in this space. I mentioned we help the helpers. We have a comprehensive set of programs. I just want to go through it briefly to highlight some of the opportunities to intervene with concerned others using digital mediums. One note, all of these services are free. There's no pay model here, so anybody can refer somebody to our helpline, to our website, to our online mobile programs, to our skills building courses, to our online peer-to-peer parent coaching, and to our online support community, where we have different topics such as a prevention group, an early intervention group, a recovery group, a group for parents whose kids have recently relapsed or are in the middle of it. So we offer a range of different programs for individuals, and just briefly want to go over some of the opportunities that anyone can have, not just to send people our way, but to think about how you can build your own programming. So always like to think about the journey, how people come in. So as we think about the programs we build and you think about the programs that you build, please always think about that journey. How do you engage someone using different communication mediums? What assessments are you using? What type of feedback are you giving someone? Is it a one and done, or do you want to keep them engaged in the conversation? What are you doing in terms of synchronous versus asynchronous communication? What mediums are you using to do that? How do you adapt the intervention, particularly for young people and family members, because things change so quickly? And then ultimately, how do you localize that? One of the ways we like to engage people is focused on people's preferred mode of communication. So whether a family member is coming in via Facebook or they're coming in via SMS, they're all going into one platform. If they're coming in via phone, same platform. So we're able to triage them in a different way, but we're able to meet them using their preferred mode of communication. In the last year, we've engaged one-on-one conversations via different mediums with nearly 15,000 families. And in particular, and this is just for our helpline, this doesn't include our online support groups, this doesn't include other mediums. What we found is that people like to come in and stay in their medium. So if you come in via Facebook, you like to stay and talk to a specialist or a coach over Facebook Messenger. If you come in via SMS, the same way. So just opening up communication channels allows you to engage people who you might not have engaged with. When we added our SMS feature, we didn't do any advertising, we didn't do anything else, added the SMS feature, what we saw was a skyrocket in the number of people coming in via SMS. And we don't know if they would have come in otherwise without that. So in looking at some of our data, some of the things we're seeing in terms of people coming to our helpline is very similar to the overall treatment. About a quarter of the people who come to our helpline are Spanish speaking. We have bilingual helpline specialists. It's mostly mothers and or female carers calling, and they're mostly calling about their male identified child who is using. We also see that the age range is particularly these adolescents and young adults. So 13 to 30 is where we see the largest group of individuals in terms of those we help. We help anybody who wants to help a loved one. So that's why the age range is so large. And as many of the parents say, you're never not a parent. In terms of who it is, it's usually a parent or guardian, but there's other people as well. And the loved one need state, one of the things we find is people go to the web for prevention. So the more severe it gets, the more people want to connect. So it's mostly people in the middle of it or in the early use phases. We also see that the majority of carers are coming in for marijuana. This is consistent with the treatment literature, followed by opioids, followed by stimulants. And as I mentioned, about a quarter of the individuals coming in are Spanish speaking. We specifically target Latinx populations because of the lack of resources. But it just goes to show you that you can really target specific populations. And we have a number of grants to target BIPOC populations that we traditionally have not targeted. We also have mobile interventions, and you all can try this. You can just text join to 55753, fill out an assessment, and you can start receiving messages. So if, and for clients as well, this is all for concerned significant others. It's not for the individual themselves, but we can really personalize care. And this is how easy it is. You can text join to 55753 and get an intervention right then and there. There's one thing I want to highlight in this slide, so over the last year, we've done a lot and we've reached a lot of people. But one of the things I want to highlight is that of the people who come into the automated interventions, is that 27% type in chat to speak with a specialist. So they've come in via an automated intervention. They didn't want to speak with anybody, and then a quarter of them end up reaching out because they were given the opportunity. Similarly, actually, almost 40% of people are now engaged over longer periods of time. Helplines are traditionally a one and done. Nearly 40% of people are reaching out after that initial contact. So I've given you an idea of all that's out there. I hope I also gave you an idea of the opportunity and what we can do. Using our helpline as an example, this is a way we can reach lots of family members. The wonderful thing about technology is all of you can do this too. There are platforms available to you where you can build interventions. And you don't need much. You can just start with the most basic of basic features. As we all know, we're using Zoom now, we're using Google Meet, we're using or HIPAA compliant programming. That shifted so dramatically in the last year. And I hope you think the same way of these other technology-based systems, that you can think about it and you can actually integrate it into your practice, into your research. And I end with this, which is focus, review the literature, take a look, and then question the literature. Because what we know is that the literature, when done in a controlled study, does not equal real world outcomes. We know, we did a study where we found app retention in real world settings is about 5%. In studies, it's 80 to 90%. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. Do it yourself. Try it yourself and don't cheat. If you don't like doing it, it's likely your population doesn't like doing it. Then try it with your target population. See if they want to do it, because maybe you're not seeing what they're seeing in it. So try it with your target population. And then finally do it when nobody cares. There's no incentive. See if the technology is self-sustaining. Here are some other references that I cited during the presentation. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with me during this time, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation. So please reach out to me if you have any questions. And thank you also to the ATTC, EMERSA, and NORC and all of the groups who put this together. This is an amazing series.
Well, thank you, Dr. Munch, for your presentation today. It was very informative. You can access the links to the slides from today's presentation and the on-demand recording on the EMERSA, ATTC, and NORC websites. To augment the information provided today, you can check out these additional resources from the ATTC and PTTC networks. You can also keep in touch with ATTC, NORC, and EMERSA via their newsletters and social media. Sign up now for monthly emails and follow them on Twitter and Facebook. And with that, we thank you so much for attending this presentation today. This will now conclude today's webinar. We hope you will view all of the episodes in this Transitional Age Youth series. Thank you.